You asked for it, so today I'm taking a look at the DC Multiverse Batman Reborn, and don't worry, there's gonna be plenty of head swaps. Starting with the packaging, we've got our DC Multiverse window box, Batman Reborn on the side, though the UPC specifies it's Dick Grayson, and then on the back we have this iconic cover by Frank Quitely. We also have this version of Damian on the way. For packaging, I'm giving Batman Reborn 5 points. Moving on to presentation, and Bat Robin stands at 7 1/8 inches, or thereabouts 18 centimeters, and is mostly reuse of Nightfall, kinda sorta. I'll explain. Broad strokes like the upper arms, abdomen, legs, and trunks are the same. The torso is that smooth version without a logo that they originally made for Catman, with that wireless cape engineering we see from the Bane 2-pack, new hands and forearms, a new utility belt, a wonderful wired cape, and a new head inspired by Frank Quitely's style. When I first saw the promo images, I had mixed feelings about using this particular body for this version of Batman, but in hand it's really grown on me. In my mind's eye, Dick Grayson shouldn't be quite as big and bulky as Bruce, so putting him alongside, say, Hush, and this works really well for me. That said, for those who use Batman's more in scale with Nightfall, I have seen people shave off a bit of Dick Grayson's ankles to make him shorter. I've also seen people use this as a base to make a smaller scale Hush Batman, but we'll get there in playability. I think my favorite new sculpted piece are these knuckle dusters, or as I like to call them, the Bat Find Outs. Coming from someone who doesn't necessarily love Frank Quitely's style, McFarlane has done a really good job on this head, though the ears are a little too bulgy. There is a conversation to be had as to whether or not this costume is supposed to be black and gray or blue and gray. Personally, I think it's supposed to be blue, and I think McFarlane knows that too, since they used that blue and gray Platinum edition to promote Damian. Luckily, I do have him as well, but we'll be looking at him in a different video. The nice thing about the black and gray is the head swap potential, but again, that's for playability. For presentation, and I'm giving Batman Reborn 5 points. Moving on to Poseability, and I've got to admit that the articulation is one of my favorite things about the Nightfall style body. You can look up this high, which is pretty good, this far down, more than serviceable amount of tilt, and all the way around. Moving on down, and Dick can raise his arms just a hair over 90 degrees. He's got a roly-poly rotator cuff, as well as bicep swivel, double elbow with a perfect bend, and wrist balls that do all the wrist ball things. Moving to the middle, and Dick has a diaphragm joint and a dumbbell waist. Thanks to the soft goods cape not getting in the way, he can arch back this far, and he can hunch forward this far, which, while not a showstopper, is still better than usual. He can also tilt and twist. Below the utility belt, he has the typical McFarlane hips. They can kick this high and split this wide. Fair amount of twist in the hip, double knee with a nice deep bend, toe articulation, and ankles that can swivel, hinge, and like Dick Grayson, from Robin to Nightwing to Batman, pivot. Thanks to an actual functioning diaphragm joint giving him a hunch forward, and for Poseability, I'm giving Batman Reborn 5 points. Moving on to playability, and Batman comes with a trading card and a figure stand. If you want to learn more about why Dick Grayson had to become Batman, you can read all about it here. Otherwise, and in addition to the Bat Find Outs he comes preloaded with, Dick also has a pair of Tickle Monster hands, as well as a pair of accessory holding hands, for all his accessories. I do wish he had a pair of regular fists, but if you have the black and gray version of Nightfall Batman, you can use his. Conversely, you can use Dick's extra hands on Nightfall. Obviously, the best play feature is the wired cape. It's been made out of the same material they use for Detective Comics 27, and is nice and light for lots of display options. With your blessing, I'm actually going to skip comparisons today. We've got a lot of head swaps to look at, and I just really want to get to it. Not to worry though, I am going to show you lots of comparisons when I get around to reviewing the Platinum Edition. It only makes sense to start with Nightfall. I don't know that I can say this is a better head on the Nightfall body than the one that came with it, but if you prefer it, more power to you. I do, however, really like the Nightfall head on the Reborn body, especially if you want to try to turn this into more of a Hush style Batman. Unfortunately, the grays don't match, so you can't just swap the arms, but don't worry, I'll have some other suggestions later. Otherwise, going in basic order of release, and here we have Detective Comics 1000. As I say every time, just about any Batman head looks better on this body than the one that came with it, and this is no exception. That being the case, I do kind of dig the inverse, thanks to the logo, and it really reminds me of the new Batman Adventures. Next up is the Grim Knight. The Grayson head on this body actually looks really good. Whether it's the longer ears, pursed lips, or narrow eyes, it's a glow up for the Batman who likes to blow stuff up. On the flip side, this is exactly what I was hoping to see. I'm looking for a good short-eared Batman to work as a possible Hush custom, and this is a contender. From Grim Knight, and here we have Arkham Knight, this head on this body is a lot of fun, gives the armor a more comic booky feel. Conversely, this head makes this body feel more realistic, as if Batman was a real guy in a real costume. Similar to Grim Knight, and I'm actually really curious about Rebirth. As I expected, this is great. The head's a little small, but it's a solid short-eared look. Other way around, and if you wanted a long-eared Rebirth, this is pretty cool. For one of my favorite swappers, and here's Tim Fox from Future's End, this head on just about any Batman body could cure a rainy day. As always, I love it. And as usual, this looks pretty good too. It's a great solid Batman costume for just about any head. Next up is the Liber Mijo inspired page punchers, which I am also very curious about. In my search for that short-eared Batman, I don't like this combination as much as usual. I just feel like the cowl is a bit too detailed for the body. But if you want a long-eared version of page punchers, this looks pretty good. Leastways, it scales well. Veering back to video games, and here we have Arkham City. This head is a great option for people looking for a Batman with even longer ears. And if that's you, this is a pretty solid combination. Alternatively, this is pretty cool too. And thanks to the similar logos, it's not that different of a design. In that vein though, and here's the Arkham Knight version of Sinestro Corps. If you're looking for a more comic-style Sinestro Corps Batman, this is fine, as long as you don't mind that this isn't technically Bruce. But I am pretty impressed by this one. This one has a kinda sorta Mike Mignola vibe. Moving over to movies for a minute, and here's Michael Keaton from the Gold Label Batmobile set. I chose this one because the color scheme feels more like the Kenner Dark Knight collection, and while not perfect, I still like this better than the Keaton head we actually got. To see what I mean, here you go. It's so close, but just off enough to be really vexing. Just for jollies, and here's George Clooney from the Batman and Robin wave. This is cool because the whited out eyes does harken back to the old Kenner figures. This is cool though because it really does feel like a guy in a costume, as if either Batman was real or this was just a really good cosplayer. Back to the darkness, and here's Christian Bale's Dark Knight. Here, the whited out eyes kind of remind me of when he used that sonar cell phone gimmick. Conversely, I don't like this as much as the Clooney combo. Obviously, Bale's the better Batman, but this mask on this body just doesn't look as good to me. Next up is Pattinson. Criticizing Robert Pattinson's mask as a dead horse, I'm not going to continue to beat here. I'll just say that I do like this and would be curious to see if they could give him white eyes in the sequel. And surprisingly, I don't actually hate this. Looking kind of like a cosplayer, and this mask has a real homemade quality. And then for one last film version, and here's Ben Affleck from Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. Not unlike Clooney, this looks like it could be an actual real-life Batman or a cosplayer. This one, however, has the benefit of those shorter ears. If you wanted to use Batfleck's body as the base for a comic-style custom, you could, but as usual, you will need to do something about that giraffe neck. Swapping out with a slightly shorter peg, and here's what I mean. For another substitute Batman, and here's Jim Gordon. Even though it's not Bruce, this has become one of my go-to heads for Batman swaps, and as usual, I am very pleased. On the other hand, this is pretty decent too. It just shows how stylistically similar these heads are. For another one that I'm really curious about though, and here's the Phygital version of Rebirth. Not so much for this though. If you wanted to do some repainting, you could. Also not for this, but again, it could be cool to repaint. No, I wanted it for the Bruce Wayne head. It might not be everybody's mental image of Bruce Wayne, but for now, it's the best we got. This brings us to a surprise bonus figure that I bought just for this video, the unmasked Jason Todd. The box might say Jason Todd, but this is a fantastic substitute for an unmasked Dick Grayson. Zooming in and looking at the lips and jaw, the facial structure is even a little bit similar. Lastly, I want to take a minute to talk about Hush. Just a reminder that figures like Three Jokers and Hush have an incompatible neck, so I can't swap their heads, but the Greys are a near perfect match. In fact, if you wanted to go ahead and just swap the arms, here's what that would look like. From there, it's just a matter of swapping out the trunks and belt, as well as your preferred alternate head, and away we go. I will concede that depending on the angle, the arms might look a bit disproportionately large. If you're a bit more courageous, you could attempt just swapping out the forearms. Clearly, the head and part swap potential of this figure is through the roof, roof. The alternate hands are a fun addition, and I love a good wired cape. For playability, I'm giving Batman Reborn 5 points. This leaves us with nothing left to discuss but the price. In spite of the reuse, this has been one of the standout Batman figures for me so far this year. And let's be honest, at $23, you couldn't get a wired cape for what you're getting for the entire figure. For price, I'm giving Bat-Robin 5 points, averaging out to a perfect total of 5 out of 5. For more Batman head swap videos, check out one of these, and until next time, play nice and have fun.